Mesdames, Mesdemoiselles, Messieurs.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're running late on our schedule. Well, that was to be expected considering the important speakers we had, but could you all please settle down so that we can continue?
Oui, oui. C'est vous qui parlez. Oui, oui, je sais. Je sais.
Tu dois expliquer que c'est Paul.
Oui, oui.
Good luck. Je suis désolée, j'ai du retard, mais c'est de la faute de...
Mesdames, Mesdemoiselles, Messieurs.
Ladies and gentlemen, could you please take your seats so that we can continue? We have two further sessions before lunch.
Monsieur le vice-président Tajani.
Unfortunately, Mr. Tajani has to leave. So Mr. Paul Weissenberg, the Deputy Director General from the European Commission in charge of space matters, who will be here. And he will be listening closely to the representatives of industry. So I now give the floor to Mr. Daul, who is the chairman of the largest political group in the European Parliament. And I know you're a convinced European and you want space in Europe to provide all the benefits we expect of it. So could you please settle down so that we can listen to the next speaker? So we are running late, so I won't speak at great length. Thank you very much for organizing this conference once again at the European Parliament, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to take the floor. I listened to the constructive positions presented by the President of the Commission, the Council, Mr. Van Rompuy, and I also heard what the Director General of ESA and the representative of the Space Agency and Mr. Tajani, I listened to what they had to say too. So, although the commitments made at the highest level have not actually been translated into fact yet, I've listened very carefully because I'm aware of what is at stake. So it's not that we are looking towards innovating services or revolutionary services that space has brought to 500 million Europeans. We've heard mention of climate change already, and I'm thinking of the importance of monitoring our environment, the prevention and management of natural catastrophes, humanitarian aid, assistance for food security, facilitating transport, or the reduction of pollution. But we also have to consider the economic and political side of things. At the moment, we have new players emerging on the world scene, China, Brazil, India, and space policy is one of their priorities. Europe, therefore, cannot neglect its presence in space, and it also has to make the best use of the research and development and the new technologies we have at our disposal, which are job creating. The European Union cannot let its space industry weaken, and also has to provide the security and safety required. We need European defence, as I have said often enough, because I'm a convinced European, and this is all part and parcel of that. And our parliamentary group is convinced that important decisions have to be taken, and that at the same time our citizens have to understand that the monies invested in the space programs have not been spent in vain. So we have to keep our commitments with regard to space policy, and that means 4 conditions. First of all, we need to have a dynamic European policy to encourage research and development and innovation with coordination that does not stifle creativity. And there should be no duplication, which is, of course, expensive. Second, we need to have an effective European industrial policy which provides our companies with what they need to be competitive in a much in an international environment where there is stiffer competition. I want to mention the fact that we need to have lighter administrative burdens. We need to have good infrastructure and an open policy for trade based on reciprocity. Third, we need to have European financial aid adapted to the requirements of a union space policy and programs. Fourth, we need to have governance for managing the projects and also implementing the programs and management of services. And this has to fall under the political control of the European institutions, but should go beyond the fragmentation we see at the moment at national and European level. So the EPP group and the Parliament has spoken out on these 4 priorities, and it's important that Europe be there where it counts. And we have had the report of our colleague Aldo Patriciello on the space strategy in the interests of our citizens, and also discussions on the financial perspectives 2014-2020. But the budgetary discussions should not distract us from 2 other issues that I've mentioned and that are important also for Europe to be in the forefront, and that is industrial policy and innovation policy. And the European Parliament will discuss this when it discusses the Commission communication of the 14th of October. And we will be listening carefully. We have to make difficult choices at the moment. And for certain programs, we might give a little less, but together with my group, I will commit myself to keep on looking for funds within the European budget so that we can remain at the level we are at the moment and that we can work with you. Thank you.
Si vous le permettez, je vais passer maintenant la parole à Monsieur Eric Morel de Wasselguer, qui représente.
I will now give the floor to Eric Morel de Westgaver. He is the Director of Procurement for the European Space Agency. So he is very well placed to tell us how, after the many years that he's been in the post and that the European Space Agency has now been running for 2 years, how he sees things. I'll give you the floor straight away, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, space and innovation share a long history together. The extremely hostile environment, the very high dependability and long duration, low power consumption, low weight, high thermal insulation, complexity of the systems have made space a driver for innovation and innovation a key in space programs. However, there is no second chance in space, and innovation not mature enough is creating risks, and if not mastered may result in overcost during the development and also in critical cases in failure when in orbit. This maturation process, during which innovative technologies are climbing the steep technology readiness level ladder, is a key mission of space agencies. And it is essential that enough resources are invested in early phases of programs to ensure that innovation is ready to use. ESA has initiated years ago an harmonization process between space agencies and involving industry through Eurospace to ensure that all institutional euros at a time when economical resources are scarce are used in full and that undesirable duplications are avoided. This process is also key to ensure that technology harmonization is leading to a larger market for industry encompassing ESA, national programs, European programs and commercial programs. The upstream technology remains a relatively small sector, highly concentrated in a few industrial holdings, the largest four representing more than 70% of the workforce. Barriers for SMEs, which accounts for less than 8% of the total workforce, are quite significant. However, the sector where innovation is totally unbridled, however, are applications and new services. Space has proved to be an enabling sector for services and economical growth on the ground for European citizens. Many grant applications today make use of existing space infrastructure and have come with innovative solutions. The service industrial sector and the chance for innovation are by far more distributed over all European countries, and the barriers for SMEs are less important. ESA programs aims at enabling and prototype services, while the business incubators centres ESA is contributing to create, are creating new actors in the downstream application sectors. However, nobody can ask industry to invest in creating or operating services if there is no absolute guarantee that operational space systems will continue to fly. This is certainly the key mission of the institutional actors. The example of meteorology shows that public services need this guarantee of existence of the space infrastructure required, a simple access to data, and the timely preparation of the next generation and its funding. Reaching this level of consolidation has taken 15 years in meteorology. We need, of course, mature innovation in space. We need long-term guarantee of the operation of the space infrastructure to enable innovation in service on ground, but we need also modern and imaginative institutional schemes for the programs of tomorrow. A good model for the future of innovative services in space is the European Data Relay System programme, in which, under a public-private partnership venture, ESA has joined a nationally funded, extremely innovative payload, a new platform developed under an ESA programme, and a world-class operator to create a new service of fast, reliable and seamless data transfer of large quantities in real time and on demand. The public-private partnership concept, as developed in the EDRS programme, is joining an operator, several industrialists that are competing on other markets, a national space agency, ESA, and as an anchor tenant, the GMES programme. ESA needs to continue to progress in this flexible way to adapt and experiment new innovative ways, to commit with very diverse partners for enhanced or new services. In a time of financial constraints that has been underlined already several times, the key word for innovation and harmonisation between the European actors is to invest in early phases of programme to mature the technology Europe needs, support of new and innovative services based on space infrastructure whose existence is guaranteed, and new and innovative institutional schemes allowing agencies, space industry, operators, users to join force and share risks to create the services of tomorrow. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Directeur.
Thank you, Director, and thank you for keeping to the time allotted to you. Perfect. I'll now give the floor to a number of the CEOs we have here from the companies. We've heard from the institutions so far, and Mr. Dordain gave us a cross-cutting view of the sector. But as I said, I'll now give the floor to business. I'll go through it alphabetically. That's probably the fairest way of doing it. So I'll give the floor to Mr. François Auque. Now, all of the international speakers, all of the representatives from the institutions we've heard so far have said that industry has its role to play and that there are objectives such as security, job creation, and so on, which need to be looked at. So my question to you is, do you think that the necessary funds have been in place to develop this sector in the EU, and what do you need to make sure that the sector can continue along its lines?
Maybe a few introductory comments. As was very well underlined by the Polish minister, space is a driver for economic growth. And this was confirmed by OECD reports, so including downstream services. But also, space is key for the development of services, applications for citizens, and on top of that, for security and defense missions. And that's why, as was already mentioned by Jean-Jacques Dordain and a lot of people, the key ambitious countries in the world invest massively in space. Why countries invest in space? Because I want to stress one of the fundamentals of the space sector. The space sector serves mainly public needs. Commercial markets for space systems are still very limited, and European industry, as already mentioned, has a key shares on those commercial markets. But they are marginal. Commercial markets are marginal. The key markets are government markets. And so, to be very, very clear, as those non-European government markets are not accessible practically for European industry, the size of the European space industry is a direct function, a linear function of the public investment. This is what you have to keep in mind, and this is my main message. And so, what we are, as an industrialist, requesting is two things. First, investment, because if you want a European industry, if you want to keep up, you need investment. And second, the implementation of a balanced, level playing field. A few key, I would say, ideas for investment in innovation in fields where already we have leadership and we can go on building on this leadership. First example was already mentioned by Mr. Morel, is the extremely high data rate internet satellites to answer the EU Digital Agenda 2020, and also with potential good export perspectives. Second field, useless to elaborate, navigation and positioning, in order, in particular, to contribute to the European new air traffic management system, CESAR. Third example, clean space. This was mentioned already, the Space Situational Awareness Programme, in order to monitor the impacts of space weather, in order to trace near-Earth objects, but also maybe to be extended to remove space debris. Fourth, a permanent Earth observation system for environment and security. And once again, nobody could understand that the GMES program could be, let's say, left in the middle, according to the leadership of Europe in this field and the strategic importance. And last but not least, I would like also to mention access to space, which is totally key. The second set of actions that we are requesting is to set a level playing field. Once again, I think that we should not remain blindly naive, and we should be aware of the fact that today government markets everywhere in the world are earmarked for national industry. I'm not saying that I want a protection of the European market, but I want a level playing field. I want to implement the same system with our partners. So, this is my main message, and at the end of the day, I think that we need to be very, very well aware that in the mindset of our US friends, our Chinese friends, Indian friends, Russian friends, the assessment of the weight of Europe today is, like Stalin used to say, Europe, how many spacecraft?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, sir. Once again, in alphabetical order, I'll now give the floor to Mr. Fuchs. And Mr. Fuchs, you're the CEO of a company which is now important in the space landscape in Europe. And I don't mean this as criticism, but you're actually a large SME. So, being a large SME and being flanked by bigger companies, do you feel that the European Union, in particular the European Commission, is giving you all of the necessary instruments so that SMEs can blossom and can participate fully in this space policy?
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to also express some thoughts here. You kindly said that OHB has now developed to become an important company. Of course, that had to do with the Galileo project, so I would like to talk about a few thoughts from the experience with Galileo with regard to the cooperation EU, ESA, regarding competition and industrial policy. You all remember that after several years during which Europe was searching for a way to implement Galileo, the project was put back on track in 2007. Of course, that was thanks to the efforts of two organizations, meaning the European Space Agency and the European Commission. That, by the way, was even implemented, the governance, before the Lisbon Treaty, with its competences with regard to space, came into force. The sharing of the roles between these two institutions, ESA and Commission, was done with great pragmatism, and of course was built on ESA's experience in developing space programs and the political role and legitimacy of the Union for building space infrastructure. ESA was taking the role of an industrial architect, of course based on the industrial base as it was existing. But when you mention OHB's role, yes, it was for OHB an opportunity to compete for a larger role, and of course it had some industrial policy implications. Yes, that is clearly the outcome now after some time. The developments for the equipment had been done under ESA contracts, so the competition at that time for the satellites was on a fair basis, and it was based on equal access to the equipment manufacturers. So that showed that the European Union rules were compatible but also adequate with regard to an industrial policy. And that was because it was based on, at that time, on a competitive dialogue process, which was new and which was a bit risky to everybody, and everybody had to learn, and I think everybody did learn quite something. But I think what we all learned is that the interaction between the specifications and the implementation were really helping a value for money approach avoiding over-specifications and unnecessary technical sophistication. So, as this process was applied openly in the whole competition at that point, it was the basis of the new developed procurement approach that came out of this. Now, we can say a few years later, Galileo is now back on track. We had the successful launch of the IOV satellites. The first 2 satellites are operating very well. We have now the FOC contract on track, running well on schedule and in budget. Now, just recently, we have the new ITT out for further 6 to 8 satellites. So Galileo clearly being the first large infrastructure and looking at the difficulties of implementing such a new activity is very well on track and clearly is a model of how also future large space infrastructure can be implemented on a European level. So my conclusion is that clearly reflecting on the experiences we gained from Galileo, we do have the proof that there can be a combination of effective competition and build or implementation of an industrial policy that also addresses the larger interests and the long-term needs. So de facto, and that's my conclusion, de facto it is my view that Galileo has set a pattern of a role division between the players and has proved to be a very effective implementation. It shows that when there's a lot of talk or before you have a project, but the best thing really is to do a large project and then you learn and you implement rules and ways that will then also determine how future programs on the European level will be implemented in the space industry. And that is exactly what I think is now being implemented. Thank you very much.
Je voudrais passer la parole, s'il le veut bien, maintenant à monsieur.
I'll now give the floor to Jean-Yves Le Gall. You must be a happy chairman. Arianespace has achieved success after success with its launches, and you've now also recently contributed to the Galileo launches, so congratulations on that. You've now heard from the institutions this morning and from Mr. Dordain, and our European space strategy now also has at its heart launches. So are you an optimist now or not? Well, thank you for giving me the floor. Under these favourable circumstances, many have said it before. In October, we managed to launch the first 2 Galileo satellites. That's a first. It's the first launch for us, but also a new launching system that was being used and that was developed in Europe. And I think that shows that free access to space is a prerequisite for any space policy. If you can't manage to launch the satellites that you want to use in the way you want and in the conditions you want, we wouldn't be here talking about Galileo. You need that technology and know-how. And free access to space, in my view, can be broken down over 3 topics or points. First of all, you need a launcher policy. And in Europe we now have such a policy. It was started in the 1970s by the European Space Agency, and since then that has developed. From 1980 to 2000, you had the launch of the Ariane 1, 2, 3 and 4. The second stage then was the last 10 years with the success of Ariane 5. Ariane 5 is the only launcher in the world which had 40 successful launches that's a record. Our competitors can't string together 5 successful launches. We've had 40. That is a brilliant result. And then the last stage in that development is the stage we have before us now. These are the launchers and the technology developed by the European Space Agency, the one that was developed from Ariane 5, and we will also see that technology used in the small launcher, the Vega, which will allow us to put in orbit satellite and Earth surveillance equipment. So we clearly have a launcher policy, but that's not enough. That's only part of the story. Once those launchers have been developed, you then also need to move on to other things. You need to support exploitation. And that's because launcher infrastructure, be they companies in Europe or the launch pad in French Guiana, cost money, and you can't fund that just by the services that you provide through launching. So member states need to continue to flank these launchers. There are 6 space powers in the world that have the capability of launching: Russia, the US, Japan, China, India and Europe. And Mr. Oak reminded us just earlier, those 5 other powers put a lot of money and support into their launching activity, and Europe needs to do the same. Europe needs to follow suit. The second important part then, and often we lose sight of this, is that once these systems have been developed and once we support their exploitation, we need to look at who is going to use that and how it is to be used. And that's not always straightforward. European satellites, it has been mooted, could be launched by non-European launchers. But go and ask our US friends, our Russian friends, our Chinese friends and Indian friends. They wouldn't dream of launching a national satellite through a foreign system. And the same should apply in Europe. You have Ariane, Vega, Soyuz, that will be launched with European technology. We launched Galileo. We've also launched national satellites. We have GMES, of course. But we shouldn't have a discussion on that. This should be taken as read, that we launch our own satellites. That's what our competitors do, and that is why they are competitive. And then you have commercial launchers. And we heard something about that earlier as well. We don't have a lot of governments making launches. So Europe needs to find a way of ensuring accessibility to these launchers, and that can be done by being the first on the commercial market. And Ariane is leading the field there and has been leading the field for the past 30 years. We've entered into 30 new contracts for commercial users. We'll have 10 to 12 launches over the next few years, and we need to continue along those lines, because that's a way of making sure that governmental satellites can be launched successfully and over time. So we have a launching system in Europe now that works. There is a launcher policy. We support the exploitation. We use the European systems. There are the institutions, the Commission, but also the member states that are involved in that, and they've been successful. And industry, of course, has played its part. We've been successful, but we shouldn't rest on our laurels. We need to prepare for the future. We need to look at new launches. That's what they do in the rest of the world. We need to continue supporting exploitation, and we need to continue using our own technology. Thank you.
Je voudrais passer la parole maintenant, s'il veut bien, à monsieur.
I'll now give the floor to Mr. Sesnek. Sir, you're also the CEO of a large company in the space industry. Now, we've heard about the needs which the space industry has, but could I ask you your view on that, of course, but also what is needed in addition to innovation and industry? Have we been stressing enough today what the Commission might be able to do under their research and development program. Do you have any expectations there? And are there, in your view, other areas, other policy areas in the EU which could support the space industry as well?
Thank you, and good morning, and thank you to all for the opportunity. If we look at the recent past, it is true that the Union has all the reasons to be proud of what the Member States have achieved through their national and European agencies. And the success of Galileo and GMES are also symbols of this European integration. And this European integration, as you know and as you can see, also exists at industrial level and even at different levels, since the large prime are mainly European and being based in several countries, but it's also true at the level of the SMEs. So it's an ecosystem that we are talking about. We are facing challenges. That's the key driver of my thoughts today. And these challenges are in a number of four, mainly. One is the comeback of US industry as a result of the weak dollar. The other one is and will be more and more the emerging countries. The third one is the risk of porosity of the European market and the dispersion of efforts. And the last one is gaps in technology. So it is true that the question of research and development and the way it is funded within a consistent and well-developed market is absolutely essential. So we need to do that, and we need to recognize the specificity of space and agree on a sectorial policy in line with the Europe 2020 objectives, as it has been done for other sectors. Space solutions must also appear in a right proportion in the techno-mix of solutions between terrestrial and satellite. Typically, one should aim for 3 to 5%. It's not enormous, but for our industry it is 3 to 5% of telecom investment spent on telecom satellites, and I would say more and more on the broadband side of the development. Of course, all has been said about the importance of access to space, so I will not come back to that. On the international front, the concept of reciprocity should apply without being naive, not at all. Internal to Europe, we have competition among our industry. This is necessary and sound. Geo-return is also legitimate and sound, as long as it is not misused, as it could result in higher prices and a weaker competitive spirit. So space industry is one where Europe can enjoy having on its soil the whole value chain, including launchers, satellite manufacturing, and services. Space and space industry is all about investment, not spending, investment. Investing in space infrastructure is sound because space infrastructure have the lowest operating cost. They also generate the highest benefits to the society and economical returns with multipliers above 20 euros to the euro invested. The cornerstone of this investment is R&D, and R&D, I would say, is the blood in our factories. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. The last person from industry is Mr. Guillot. And could you try and provide a summary of the main points that have emerged from what previous speakers have said and add your own view of things and your own expectations. You have the floor.
Merci, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say that I will try. It's clear that space is a highly strategic sector for Europe, and on this there is no doubt. But it's also clear that space has a very specific characteristic. It is a niche market. It's not an enormous market. When we are talking about telecommunication satellite, that is the largest market for our industry, the investment in satellite is less than 2% of the terrestrial wireless investment. So we are talking of a very specific niche market with a lot of benefit for the citizen, but with a very specific market. The risk on the investment is very high. The failure in most of the cases is total failure. The level of investment is very high, as Mr. Sesnek was remembering. The R&D and the security factor that are characterizing the satellite are enormously increasing the cost of the investment. The political and the strategic implications are overriding factor. Furthermore, we have listened that the competition is growing, not only from the normal countries like US, but China, in the period 2004-2008, has dominated the market with their launch. The new space administration are growing in new countries, and more than this, in my mind, the ground infrastructure competing with the space activities are collecting large investment, and not only by private market, but also from the public market. So what it means that under such a consideration and constraint, an industrial policy is not only necessary, but is mandatory. And what we mean for industrial policy? If I have to summarize, I would like to close with 3 points. The industrial policy does not mean specifically a procurement policy. This is something that for most of the time has been confused between industrial policy and procurement policy. Procurement policy is a part of the industrial policy, but it's not all. Industrial policy requires strong and clear commitment either by public and from private. Third, industrial policy has to consider all the value chain from manufacturing to launch to the services provision, and not only to the R&D. I was saying that industrial policy should include a larger approach. It includes protection. If we want, we cannot compete against countries that have a very close protection. We are not bidding, we can hardly bid in the States, we are not bidding in Russia, we are not bidding in China. The concept of reciprocity should apply. The decision which kind of key technology we have to maintain in Europe, even if the market does not provide support to this key technology, it's clear that somebody has to support the maintenance of this key technology in Europe. We have defined the process of competition. Either it is a single source, dual source, and when the process of competition is viable. And we have to define the level and the relation between large and the small industry. This is a part of the industrial policy. This will include also a part of the procurement policy at the end, but when the principle, it will be clear. I was saying as a second point that we need strong commitment, and I am glad that we hear that from Mr. Daul the commitments are very clear and very well indicated. We need to have a clear policy and priority. We need to have a clear plan for the future. We need to have a clear government and management framework and a clear governance. But we need also to have a clear enforcing policy for the utilization of space activity. Because it's not enough to create infrastructure like Galileo if we don't have the enforcing policy to use Galileo for the air traffic control or for the maritime control. This is essential that the authority that has this kind of responsibility do it. Obviously, from the private, we should guarantee the right level of competitiveness, we should guarantee the proper investment, the flexibility to adapt to the new situation, and as well the maintenance of the key capacity. This is what, from a private, we should guarantee. The last point is to consider the entire value chain. We have listened that the space launcher is a priority. We have listened that R&D is a priority. But we should also consider that the service and the way in which we are providing service to the citizen is a part of the industrial policy. Everybody knows the approach that actually DoD is taking, as well as NASA is taking. Instead of buying launchers or buying satellite, they are buying services. They are buying service under the philosophy of the service level agreement. This has created SpaceX, this has created VentureView, this has created JOI, and so on. I believe that the industrial policy has also to touch this point. I can only conclude saying that without an industrial policy, it will be difficult to maintain the actual position in the world, and it will be difficult to maintain the actual leadership of the European industries in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Nous n'avons plus beaucoup de temps pour faire.
We don't have that much time, but I'd like to ask Mr. Dominique Ristori, who is from the Joint Research Centre, to tell us what his view of the industrial policy. And you, as Director General in the Joint Research Centre, sort of midway with the European institutions and industry, because obviously you work with them on all development issues. So could you perhaps just tell us in a few words how you see the stage at the moment? Thank you. I'd like to make a few summary points. First of all, it's important to strengthen the industrial policy in Europe today. We've heard mention of this, but little has been done. And I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to Vice President Mr. Tajani because of the new path that he has laid out. It's in this unprecedented economic crisis, it is important to link the economic sector with the industry. And he mentioned this morning that space policy is a strategic issue, and there are lots of other aspects depending on that. That's my first point. Second, this has been said today that there is a close link between industrial policy, research policy, and with research policy and science and innovation. You cannot have competitiveness without a capacity to innovate. And with space policy, you have to find a way of making better use of knowledge by changing knowledge into new products, new markets, and new services. And this is a key aspect. We've heard mention of niche markets, and there are more than one thinks. Open to new products, new services, and can be exploited thanks to the benefits of space. Transport, maritime, air, navigation systems, energy. At a time when we are looking at our energy supply anew and where renewable sources of energy are becoming extremely important. And it is important to identify where the resources lie for biomass, for wind energy and solar energy. It's true for engineering as well, construction industry. Anti-vibration resistance systems, health, medicine, for many different fields for safety and security. Airbags, but also detection and protection systems in airports. So there's a whole range there, and we have to have the means to be able to make use of that. We work very closely with DG Enterprise. The Joint Research Centre is the only Commission service in charge of direct research, and we have initiated a number of projects, Emalias, and I'd like to greet one of my predecessors who was behind the GMES project, Mr. Al-Gayer, and I suggest a round of applause for him. Thank you, Mr. Al-Gayer. And on a daily basis, we enjoy the benefits of GMES in important areas. For example, climate change, the impact of climate change on our land, water, development in general. Second, food security, that we have to take a new look at in terms of potential for agriculture, and especially European agriculture. How can we feed a population of 7 billion people and protect at the same time the soil, our energy and water? The same applies to access to energy. I've already mentioned renewable sources of energy. And in a few weeks' time, we'll be presenting a new research and innovation program. And what the Commission has indicated is that there'll be a strong increase, 50 to 80 billion. But together, we have to define clear priorities in key areas, and also make access far easier for all enterprises, including small and medium-sized enterprises. In conclusion, I would say that science, research and innovation in space is a very important investment in our future and the future of a European industrial policy. My second conclusion would be that for this to be achieved, we have to strengthen cooperation between all players, governments, parliaments, industry, science, research and innovation. Space is an adventure, and we've often had stiff discussions on this in Council with Galileo, and we have won because we managed to coordinate our efforts. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Directeur Général.
Thank you, Mr. Director General. I'd like to ask Mr. Paul Weisender, who is here and who's been taking notes, I see, if in conclusion he could make some comments. Go ahead.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Brièvement.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and be brief, also because I'm in full agreement with what has been said. First of all, we face a global challenge. It's not a European challenge. And in Europe, we have this tendency of wasting a lot of energy within the European Union, between industry, the European institutions, and our governments. I think the message we need to send out is that any space policy has a global dimension. If we can't get organized in a better way in Europe, we won't stand a chance. Secondly, the value chain. Yes, that's important. It's not just about developing hardware, and I agree with what Mr. Sednec has said. Research and development is the blood in our factory, and it's in that spirit that the Commission, in its Horizon 2020 project, has suggested significantly increasing expenditure for research and development. And as there is a research for space part to that, I'm confident that over the next financial perspectives, the money attributed to that will increase. Thirdly, then, you can't have an industrial policy without having a launcher policy in place. Launchers in Europe are very much part of the value chain. And I think in Europe we have every interest in saying that Kourou is not just a French port to space, it's a European port to space. And we are wearing two hats in the Commission. We're the customer. We need to launch our satellites for Galileo and GMES, but we also have political responsibility. So there's a hybrid function that the Commission has there. And that means that we need to favour the use of European launchers, and we are actually negotiating with Mr. Legal the conditions for future launches of Galileo. So to cut a long story short, I think we are pulling together now in Europe between the various institutions and industry, and between now and the next few years we will see the fruit of that work. Thank you.
J'avais promis de passer la parole à Monsieur Kazan qui
I did say I was going to give the floor to Mr. Kazan, who represents the Intergroup Space Conference. So I'll give him the floor briefly. I'll give you the floor in a minute, Mr. Kazan. Let me first thank the speakers. Unfortunately, we don't have more time. We're lagging behind a bit, so you didn't get that much time to speak, but thank you very much indeed.